Good job! Your fine city is going— Oh God, he's got a sword! Someone stop him! Why isn't anyone helping me? Oh God, stop!
Link's Awakening is a weird game. It has a little bit in common with Majora's Mask in that it discards the normal Zelda rules, inserting characters that shouldn't be there and regularly breaking the fourth wall. Not only are Goombas and other Mario enemies in the game, but Link can jump on them in a side-scrolling view. All of this strangeness is very purposeful and woven into the story in ways I don't want to spoil for anyone. It's like a fever dream version of A Link to the Past with a lot of creative twists that the series has never repeated since, and its simple retro charm holds up well enough that it wasn't exactly hurting for a remake. The new version is mostly a visual overhaul for the fun of it then, and as soon as it was announced there were people questioning the style that Nintendo and Grezzo went with. Pixel art lets your brain fill in a lot of the details, and as you get absorbed into the game you stop seeing colored squares and start seeing believable objects. When remaking a sprite-based game in 3D, you're not only competing with the original visuals as they were, but with whatever the player's imagination turned them into. That's part of the reason why the Secret of Mana remake's cheap visuals were such a letdown. You can't phone it in and expect the game to look better just because it's 3D. The new plastic toy-like style of this remake may not be what most people were imagining when playing the original, but Grezzo has put a lot of heart into making it something special. In spite of its smaller scale, it's actually a technically impressive game in terms of the amount of detail, with the lighting effects especially receiving a lot of care and attention. It gives a sense of leaning over an immaculate little Zelda diorama while playing, which is enhanced by the freely scrolling camera that makes the world seamless and allows you to take glances beyond the current screen. Even if the style isn't to your taste, it suits the playful tone of the story, and it would be hard to argue that it hasn't been really well crafted for what it is. The original audio also left a lot of room for interpretation since it was really just buzzes and beeps at different frequencies. The sound design is great, and has given me my favorite sound in recent memory. Listen to that. The new soundtrack is like sitting in the middle of a string quartet, which blends really well with the toy visuals. It almost reaches the level of a modern Yoshi game in terms of how relentlessly pleasant it is to soak in. There may be a few instances where the score doesn't really capture the original mood. But there are also cases where I think it exceeds it by a really wide margin. The remake made some bold choices with its style, but it still seems faithful to the original when directly comparing them. I think that's a sign of how good a job Grezzo did with the game. There are only a few drawbacks I can think of, one being that the 3D camera often obscures the terrain in a way that never happens with 2D. I briefly got stuck a few times because of things like seeing a ramp as a straight drop-off. The camera also doesn't scroll in dungeons, which makes sense when the focus needs to be on one room at a time, but it does feel jarring to suddenly go back to hard screen shifts after being out in the fields. The only major problem is that the Switch barely seems capable of running the game. In docked mode it almost never seems to hold at 60 frames per second when moving, and the textures and lighting often flicker in a really noticeable way. As someone who feels right at home playing the 20 frames per second Zeldas, I think I can say I'm not particularly sensitive about frame rates, but even I found the performance issues to be really distracting. Given the limited top-down view and the simple nature of the game, it's disappointing that they couldn't get it more polished than this. The gameplay itself has a few issues that remain mostly unchanged in the remake. Maybe it's just me, but the puzzle quality doesn't seem consistent. There are some great and clever rooms in each dungeon, and some that just seem like unintuitive and tedious wastes of time. I resorted to using a guide more than I care to admit, and that's having played through the DX version before. I don't mind getting stumped, but ideally when checking a guide I should think I'm an idiot for not figuring that out, not that was so arbitrary I never would have gotten it. The game also relies on unsubtle directions to constantly guide the player to the next area of the game. Sometimes they border on objective marker territory, and the game seems to swing between giving you too much and too little information about what to do. It's still a lot of fun, but it's not exactly the best designed game in the series. The remake does a few things to make it play better, and in this case all of them actually work. Link was originally limited to just 2 items at once, and since you would never want to get rid of his sword, you basically had to pause it every time you wanted to use a different item. The remake devotes buttons to the sword, shield, and Pegasus boots, and no longer requires equipping the bracelet. On top of that, you still have 2 mappable buttons to use. It does a huge amount to streamline the game, but it could have gone a little bit further. The top and bottom triggers are mirrored, when one set easily could have been used for another pair of items. The feather is another frequently used item, because the game actually uses the jumping mechanic really well. so I left it permanently equipped and had just one spot open for most of the game. The lack of D-pad use is also frustrating since the game is limited to digital movement. While A Link Between Worlds let you turn smoothly, this time you're limited to 8 directions and I could never get used to it. Being forced to use the stick to move only made the stiffness more apparent, and I never stopped wondering what the game would feel like with free analog movement. The closest I got to it was this glitch that stuck Link in a constant spin this entire dungeon, which I considered to be a great time. Rumble is barely used outside of a few minigames, and I don't just mean the HD Rumble. The past games have conditioned me to expect rumble at certain moments, and it is a little odd that there just isn't any there. I'll never get to experience the haptic feedback of a chicken's wing flapping now. The camera shop from the DX version has been replaced with a dungeon builder minigame, which is something a lot of people have wanted ever since Mario Maker came out. Seeing the results, I don't think the concept works. Building a dungeon is far more complicated than making a Mario level, and if there were an online game devoted to this, you would be sure to come across very few good dungeons. They've simplified it here by only letting you arrange rooms from the game dungeons just as they appeared in your playthrough, which makes it less of a real dungeon builder and more of a dull rearranging of what you've already seen. I only played it long enough to get a few item rewards before losing interest. The last big change I noticed was the revamping of warp points, which are now more numerous and bring up a selection menu instead of immediately chucking you off to the next point. The ocarina has also been given the ability to warp to these points from anywhere instead of only sending you to a specific pond. You can also put marks down on the map, which is always a useful feature in exploration games, and the Switch's screenshot ability will come in handy more than once. The game isn't as big as most other Zeldas, and you'll probably have the whole map filled within the first hour or two, but there's still plenty to do to keep you busy. It doesn't have as many dungeons as A Link to the Past, but it does have a higher density of secrets and upgrades to find, especially in this version. Maybe it should have been $50, which is something Nintendo has done in the past for games like Tropical Freeze, but it's not a stretch to sell this as a $60 game. It wasn't really necessary, but it is a very fun and, in my opinion, successful refresh of the original game, and it also serves as a nice sort of successor to A Link Between Worlds on a technical level. If I were in the business of giving scores, I'd call it an 8.5 out of 10. But I'm not. Take that down.